Okay, I'm ready to go. So today we're going to talk about introverted thinking, and I nicknamed this function the scientist function because when you think about it, that's kind of how introverted thinkers like to think. The scientist is known for wanting to define and to understand and to comprehend. The scientist is thinking in terms of what can I prove, what can I support, can I back up with data, what are the facts, what can I know, how do I know it. It's using rules and it's using systems or it's using some kind of model to define how you think. The first part of introverted thinking is not necessarily that complex and it's not necessarily that refined either. It's just starting from that point of defining one's own thoughts. Introverted means subjective, means comes from the self and comes from one's personal position, where you are, what you wear, what you do, where you work, where you operate, and where you live. So it's based on what we feel and identify with as us. It's our sense of responsibility, it's our sense of who we are. Thinking is based on, rooted in what we can define, what we can explain, what we can put names and terms on, what we can measure, what we can observe, what we can get data to back up. It is based on what we can consciously think of and understand and think about in a conscious manner. So it has everything to do with how we structure our thoughts and our thinking, and it has to do with active thinking. So being conscious of your own thoughts, being conscious of how you think about something, how you define it, how you understand it, and how it seems to work. So often when you look at about introverted thinking, what you're looking at is somebody that is trying to understand the self or the inner parts or the subjective factor of how the world works. So it has a lot to do with trying to understand the world from a rational perspective. It is not enough that the world has a shape and a form and that things seem to work. The introverted thinking type wants to define and understand how it works and wants to make sense of the world with their thoughts to come up with an explanation for how things think. And you can see introverted thinking as well in other personality types. When you look at extroverted feelers, it comes from like a chronic or anxious drive to explain and rationalize your decisions. So you have a feeling and you feel a certain way about something, and then you need to come up with an explanation for how it works and say, this is how it works, this is why I do it, this is why I feel that way. Introverted thinking for an INTP or an INTJ, that starts a lot more dominantly. It's a dominant function, it's a flow function. So for an INTP or an ISTP, it comes from this position of flow. It's the first thing we experience, that you experience. It's the first thing that you come up with and the first thing you think. So it is your starting point in many ways. It is where we like to begin. Okay, how can I explain it? How can I understand it? How can I see the world? So, to start with, what you observe and the facts and the data and what you have evidence for, that feels on some level wrong or outside an introvert's comfort zone. To be told, here is reality, here is how reality works, without getting an explanation, without getting anything in depth to help back that up, that feels wrong. And it also feels, to some extent, less interesting. Why am I learning about this then? What is the point of understanding it? If it is something outside me and if it just works and if it has nothing to do with me and if it's not about me in any way, why should I want to know about it? The introvert wants to have a purpose to understand something. So often when you're teaching introverts, it's very difficult because you have to relate it to self. You have to relate it to what they do, to what they are interested in, to what they identify with. So if they are and identify as interested in a certain system, it's a lot easier to get them to study it and to think about it and to consider it. But if they're not, it's like you're pushing something on them and they feel forced to hear what you're saying, and it often just goes over their heads. So you have to connect it to them and you have to let them kind of start. What I'm learning with introverts is introverts want to be the ones that explain how it works. They don't want the world to be explained for them. So often they reject explanations, they reject what they see, what they hear, what they read. They're not interested in it. Well, they can be and they can accept that it's necessary and that it's important. But if they can, they prefer to be the first to try to understand it and to interpret it, and then consider, okay, what do other people think about it. So that's part of what it means to have it as your dominant function. And it's also a little bit related to having it as one's tertiary function or autopilot function. Thinking is another important aspect of this. Thinking has a lot more to do with being task positive. In neuroscience, that's a term they use to describe thinking, task positive, to be conscious of something, to have definitions for something, to have and to see, to create rules for something, and to actively think about something. You know, when you're sitting down and you're actively thinking about maths or a problem or trying to understand something, that is often thinking. No matter what you're thinking about, that's often thinking. If you take music, art, whatever, if you're sitting down and consciously looking at it and observing it and thinking, so how does that look? How does that line form? How does that work? Then it's thinking. As soon as you start to become, the more conscious, the more you process it, the more it becomes thinking. The more fluid it becomes, the more vague it becomes, the more generic or abstract or emotional or personal it becomes, the more it becomes feeling. So when you just look at it and just take it in and just feel it out and just experience it and just, oh, that's nice, without making that judgment of why is it nice or how does it look or what makes it nice, then it's feeling. So that is also why it goes into the scientist's brain, because a scientist's brain needs to have an explanation for things. And coming from the perspective of introverted feeling as an INFJ, that is not that important. That explanation is not that interesting. It's not necessary. I don't need to have an explanation for it. I don't need to have to logicalize it. I don't need to rationalize it. I don't need to define it. All I have to do is just feel it out. And does it feel like it makes sense? Does it feel like it fits? Do I resonate with it? That's how the introverted feeling process works, and it's a lot more nuanced in that sense. You know, thinking is formalized, so thinking is often very formal. So what that means is it has to do with, okay, if this is true, like there is, to a person who thinks formally, it is something is either true or false. This is a fact and that is a fact, and that I can observe and that I can explain, and that's what you see. Thinking is everything you can formalize and rationalize in that sense. Feeling is all the things around that, everything you can't explain, everything you can't define, everything you can't understand, but that you can properly accept on some level is there. Like qualia, it's the term. Like quality is often something you need feeling to understand the quality of the wind or how it feels to be out on a sunny day. Or so without an instrument, without anything, that's quality. Quantity, that is whenever you can formalize, define, or rationalize it in some way. So I call introverted thinking the analytical intelligence, perhaps out of lack for a better term. I call introverted feeling interpersonal intelligence. I call extroverted feeling interpersonal intelligence. So with introverted thinking, it's basically the intelligence that allows us to understand how things work. How do they work? Why do they work? What makes them work? And that can be applied to so many things. It can be applied to people, it can be applied to music, it can be applied to anything. So don't get too caught up in that aspect of it. Oh, that person likes art versus oh, that person likes science. You can understand that you'll be interested in science as a feeling type, but you will come naturally from the perspective of quality and nuances. You'll be trying to investigate more uh, less rational aspects of the scientific world and things that are a little more on the edges of science. As a thinker, you can go into art and you'll understand that, but you'll find yourself understanding it from the perspective of why do people like this? What makes people like this? What is the formula behind this? What is the formula behind a good movie? What is the thing behind how things, what makes something good or bad or nice or ugly or so on and so forth. So the formula is very interesting for an introverted thinker. The recipe is perhaps how to best explain it. With a recipe, what you mean is, well, introverted thinkers, they think in terms of recipes or formulas. A leads to B leads to C. That's a formula, that's a recipe. First do step A, then step B, then step C. Introverted thinkers love to create formulas for things. And that's when you take evidence, that's when you take things you have understood about things, and you understand them, you put them together, like putting together a tool or a process. Introverted thinking is all about that, putting together a formula, explaining or defining a recipe, and coming up with a set of rules for things. So what you're really doing is you're coming up with rules and tools for life. Jordan B. Peterson, INTJ, creates this book. He calls it The Rules of Life. Wait a second, that's gonna get that title right. The 12 Rules for Life. That's introverted thinking. That's introverted thinking right there. There are rules to life. There is a logic. If you follow these steps, you will. If you use these methods, you will. If you take these steps, you will succeed. So that's typical introverted thinking right there. Then you go towards, for example, Barney Stinson's playbook or something like that. It's all about like defining how do you do something. So for thinking and perceiving types like INTPs and ISTPs, it may not be as defined and it may not be as strategic, but there are, according to the INTP, rules to how things work. So they assume the world operates according to logic. You know, just as I can assume the world operates according to intentions. I believe, oh, this happened because people intended for it to happen. This system works that way because people in the top intend for it to work that way. Where introverted thinkers assume it works a certain way because there are certain rules and certain logic to it. So because of these rules, people tend to do this. Because of that rule, people tend to act like that. That's basically the difference in a nutshell. Going from what are the rules, what is the smart thing to do in a situation, then that is the right thing to do. And that's the ethical thing and the values-based thing. And extroverted feelers and introverted thinkers can get into a lot of issues with regards to this. Extroverted feelers, they can go, that's wrong. That's not the right way to do things. Even though the rules are there, even though the system says this is a good thing to do, even though everything that's going on, extroverted feelers believe ethical principles and feelings in the moment should have precedence over rules and what is logical or what is rational. When you look at introverted thinking in that way, no audio? Give me a sec. Does it work now? Yeah, there is. Okay, I got trolled. Oh no. It happened. I also get trolled. Where was I? Yeah, introverted thinkers believe that rules and laws should have some kind of precedence over what you feel in the moment. So when the introverted thinker gets in the grip of extroverted feeling, often what happens is they feel like, oh no, I let my feelings get the better of me. Like, I know this is the smart thing to do and I know this is rational, but suddenly extroverted feeling comes up and it just makes me like lash out and it makes me do something really irrational. That's typical of introverted thinking. It perceives emotions as something that takes over them. In bad moments, in moments of stress, in moments of anxiety, extroverted feeling comes up and it just makes them feel like all these things. So, like suddenly, I just become so frustrated with that person, and because I'm frustrated, that like it gets you heated up and it gets you like to act irrationally, and it gets you to feel like you're acting out of your values. You know, it's weird when you have introverted thinking as your flow function. It's essentially your heart. Introverted thinking is your heart. It is your moral compass, your principle. If you act on this, if you follow these rules, you'll be a better person. You'll do something good. You can feel satisfied, proud of yourself. You can feel good about yourself. You can feel like you have succeeded at something. You can feel like you are contributing to society, that you're doing something meaningful. If you master introverted thinking as an INTP, you are becoming a better person. That's how it feels when you get into it and you really start developing it. Oh my God, I'm starting to feel like I'm becoming a better person. I'm starting to feel like I'm doing better at work and I'm becoming a professional. I'm becoming really good at something. When you're deep diving into it, you're essentially practicing your ability to use introverted thinking to master things, to understand things, and to use what you have learned to make things better. So the memory of an introverted thinker often relies on them feeling like there has to be a process to things. If you want to teach an introverted thinker, you want as a teacher to tell them there's a process to things. So, okay, this is how maths work. This is how you solve equations. This is how you finish this puzzle. This is how you grade this movie. This is how you make this excellent work. When you're trying to get an introverted thinker to do their best, what you're doing is you're giving them all this feedback. You're telling them, okay, so what's the process? Okay, so how do you solve this equation? You're getting them to think about, and you're getting them to think about procedures and facts and data and like rules to how things work. You're putting them in a situation where you tell them there are rules to life, there are rules to good grades, there's rules to succeed. That's when you're making them interested, and that's when you're making them remember what you say. So when there aren't, and when rules don't pay off, introverted thinkers can feel like their moral compass has been kind of attacked, almost as if people have put them in a situation where it doesn't matter if you're good and it doesn't do anything good. So as an introverted thinker, you like to believe that if I follow these rules, if I follow these methods, I should get a good grade. My boss should give me a promotion or a higher salary, my friends should like me more and should be more happy with me. So when you don't get that feedback back, when other people don't notice this, it can feel very difficult. You're giving off your heart. You're giving them what you have and what you value. You're helping them. You're using every means you can that is natural to you to help other people. But they are not seeing it, or they don't like it, or they tell you it's wrong. They start telling you instead that you should do this instead, or no, that's not good enough, or you should be more pragmatic, or you should be more something else. And that can feel very difficult. So as an introverted thinker, what you're looking at and what you really need to remember all the time is you have to be your own moral compass. You have to be your own person that defines for yourself what is good. While other people's opinions do matter and is important, you have to also for yourself be able to tell if something is good. That's how you know you have developed your introverted thinking. You have gotten a strong ability to review your own decisions based on if they are good and bad, based on trust in yourself, based on confidence, and based on a sense of higher conscience. You know you're a good person. You know that you are overall good at something. You have practiced it for a long time and you have come to understand it well. So you can tell for yourself if you're doing it good or if you're doing it bad. And only as a backup and only as a frosting to that should we consider other people's opinions, what other people think, and if other people like it. That's just a small part of it. Your own part has to be the most important. If you can't know for yourself if it's good, you're going to be more anxious and you're going to be more dependent on other people's opinions, and your opinions are going to change a lot more because other people don't know either. And thinking they know, that's also a logical fallacy. So what are our comments here? Extroverted feeler males don't deserve high grades. What do you mean with that? Adrian Wong says, what's wrong with this world? People, according to INTJs. Aiden says, how dare you not nitpick everything into the ground for it to make sense? And he also says, I do need a previous interest to research something. I need to want to know it. Yeah, when I talk with INTJs sometimes and I try to explain an idea, often my core issue is telling them why it's important to them. Because often what the response I get is, why are you telling me this? So why are you telling me this? That's the most important thing. They want to know why you are putting this on them and why this is relevant. And they want to know also, the second follow-up question I get is, so how are you going to do that? How do you define that? What do you mean with this word? It's the semantics, it's the personal aspects of it. It is where you're coming from in it. Essentially, what you have to remind yourself as an introverted thinker to remain in flow is, who am I in this situation? What is my responsibility? What am I interested in? And then when you know that, what tools can I use to engage in that? How can I engage in that more? How can I make sure I have that as much as possible? How can I ensure I improve at that? What tools can I use? What strategies? What rules? What procedures? What recipes? What methods? What you're essentially getting at is logic. Yeah, introverted thinking is well described as a form of logic or reason. It's not necessarily reading patterns. It's not predicting like based on instinct and intuition where things are going or seeing the future, things like that. It's just the ability to operate on information. That means that can be understood that way. That can be different from that way. That can be distinguished from that. This is how you differentiate between these two things. This is how you determine which option is better than the other. When you're making decisions, you're using introverted thinking. Introverted thinking is a reviewing function. So what that means is it has to do with how we review the world, what we feel about the world, or what we think about the world, rather. If we think it's good or bad, if we like it or dislike it, if we think it's smart or stupid, if we think it is high or low. Everything that has to do with reviewing and coming up with and defining and understanding our experience in terms of values. It's values-based. Thinking is values-based. Thinking is a value. It's not something purely logical or objective. It is your own value that you have come up with, your own arbitrary way of understanding the universe, of what is logical and what's rational, your own personal understanding of how you think they should work, what laws society should operate according to. It's all you. It's all your personal sense of self. It's all coming from in here. It's not coming from the system. It's not coming from some kind of objective method. It's just purely your definition of something that you have defined and come to think is a good way of defining it. There's nothing really wrong with that. But it's just a good reminder, a good grounder. This is how I see the world. I don't have to see the world that way. I can choose to see things a different way. But the most important thing is I choose to see the world from a logical, rational, analytical perspective, and that I choose to focus on my personal understanding and how I want to see it, and that I choose to not just remain in myself and in my own head, but that I get confident enough about my own thoughts, about my own level, confident enough to go out and to try to prove it and to reshape reality, to reform it, to rebuild it, to put myself in positions at work, to put myself in positions with loved ones and people I care about, to put myself in fun environments where I can grow, to put myself in situations where I can build or make something using introverted thinking. That is also when you go from introversion, from purely to the self, to introversion as a flow from self out, from your own thoughts outwards. That's what you're looking for. That's what flow is. That's how you grow as an introvert thinking type. Thank you all for joining this video, and I hope to see you all in the next video.